You're listening to the Let's Talk Psychology podcast. Today, we're talking about what really happens when you let people walk all over you, why you become a doormat, what keeps you stuck in that role, and what it actually takes to stop it. When most people recognize that they are letting others walk all over them, the first explanation that comes to mind usually centers on weakness or lack of assertiveness. It is common to think, if only I were stronger or more confident, I would not allow this. This explanation makes sense on the surface, and many people accept it without question because it fits with the visible facts. They notice themselves agreeing to things they dislike, hesitating to say no, or putting others' needs ahead of their own, and it feels logical to conclude that a lack of strength or courage is to blame. However, if you examine this idea more closely, you begin to see that it does not explain the whole picture. In fact, many people who feel powerless in social or family settings can be decisive, disciplined, or even forceful in other areas of life. Someone may be effective at work, able to manage complex projects, or confident in solo activities, yet still find themselves repeatedly giving in to others' demands in friendships or relationships. This contrast suggests that weakness cannot be the sole explanation, and that something deeper must be operating. To understand what is really going on, it is helpful to ask why people continue a pattern that brings them frustration, resentment, or even self-loathing. If someone knows they will regret saying yes or keeping silent, why do they do it again and again? The answer is that the pattern is not accidental. It is a strategy, often learned early and reinforced over time, that is designed to keep certain risks at bay. Instead of seeing yourself as simply weak, it is more accurate to view this behavior as a method for navigating social situations that feel uncertain, unpredictable, or threatening. This shift in perspective is important because it reframes the doormat pattern as a response to uncertainty and discomfort, rather than an automatic result of low self-worth. When you begin to analyze the situations in which you most often give in to others, you may notice that they share certain features. Perhaps the people involved are important to you, or perhaps the stakes are high if things go badly. You might also notice that your impulse to keep the peace is stronger in situations where you fear conflict, rejection, or being misunderstood. In other words, the behavior is a way of managing potential threats, and it persists because in some ways it works. As a result, trying to solve the problem by simply being stronger or forcing yourself to be more assertive rarely creates lasting change. You may succeed in saying no once or twice, but the underlying drive to avoid discomfort and unpredictability will eventually reassert itself. Lasting change begins with recognizing that you are not failing because you are weak, but because you are relying on a strategy that once served you, even if it no longer fits your current needs or values. So, understanding that doormat behavior is not about weakness, but about managing discomfort, allows you to see the deeper motivation behind self-sacrifice. This motivation is the desire to control your environment, especially other people's reactions, in order to keep things predictable. When you put someone else's needs ahead of your own, it often feels like an act of generosity or kindness. However, beneath the surface, there is usually a calculation taking place. You might reason, if I do what they want, they will not be angry. Or if I keep the peace, the relationship will remain stable. This approach gives you a sense of control, even though it comes at the expense of your own preferences or boundaries. For example, someone might consistently agree to family obligations they dislike, simply to avoid disappointing their relatives or causing tension at home. Or someone might stay late at work to help a colleague, not because they want to, but because they fear being seen as uncooperative. In both cases, the person is trading their own comfort for the predictability that comes from pleasing others. What is crucial to recognize here is that this desire for control does not reflect malice or manipulation. Instead, it grows out of an understandable need to keep social interactions stable and to avoid the emotional costs of conflict, anger, or disapproval. Many people learn this strategy early, especially if they grew up in environments where standing up for themselves led to punishment or withdrawal. Even in adulthood, the memory of those experiences can drive people to avoid anything that threatens peace or acceptance. Over time, this self-sacrificing approach becomes second nature. The impulse to keep others happy is triggered automatically, and the discomfort of asserting yourself feels disproportionate to the situation. You may tell yourself, it is just easier to go along, or I do not want to make a big deal out of it. The problem is that, while this strategy often prevents conflict in the short term, it creates other problems in the long run. As a result, you may begin to notice growing resentment or exhaustion. Each act of self sacrifice reinforces the message that your own needs matter less than those of others. Eventually, this can lead to a chronic sense of powerlessness or a feeling that your life is dictated by other people's expectations. The original strategy, designed to give you a sense of control, ends up taking away your freedom to choose. At the same time, those around you may start to take your compliance for granted, deepening the cycle. Because of these long-term costs, it becomes clear that continuing to prioritize control over authenticity will always keep you stuck in the doormat pattern. If you want to move beyond it, you need to address not only the behaviors themselves, but also the underlying drive to avoid discomfort by managing other people's reactions. Since the urge to keep others happy is fundamentally about controlling outcomes, the only real way to escape the doormat cycle is to let go of that control. This does not mean becoming insensitive to the needs of others. Instead, it means accepting that you cannot guarantee positive reactions from everyone, and that it is not your job to manage how others feel or respond. Letting go of control begins with a willingness to experience discomfort. For example, when you express a preference that goes against the group, there is a risk that someone will disagree or be disappointed. When you say no to a request, you might encounter anger or withdrawal. At first, these experiences can feel threatening, especially if you are used to avoiding them. However, as you tolerate the discomfort and see that you can survive it, your confidence grows. This process is gradual and requires practice. At first, you might start with small situations, perhaps turning down a minor favor or sharing a personal opinion in a safe setting. Each time you resist the impulse to manage others' reactions, you give yourself evidence that the world does not end when you prioritize your own needs. Over time, you can take on larger challenges, such as addressing long-standing imbalances in important relationships or asserting boundaries at work. As you continue to practice, you discover that most people are capable of handling disappointment, disagreement, or even anger. Relationships may change, and some may end, but those that endure become more authentic and resilient. By giving up the role of managing everyone else's experience, you free yourself to act according to your values, rather than your fears. At the same time, you give others the dignity of responding as they wish, rather than as you predict or prefer. It is also important to acknowledge that letting go of control does not mean abandoning kindness or empathy. You can still care deeply about others and be sensitive to their needs. What changes is that you no longer see their comfort as your responsibility, nor do you use their approval as the main standard for your choices. This new mindset allows you to engage with others on equal footing, where both people's needs and preferences are taken seriously. The long-term benefit of surrendering control is a sense of agency and integrity. When you stop organizing your life around the avoidance of discomfort, you make room for genuine self-expression. You are able to tolerate the ups and downs of human relationships without reverting to self-sacrifice. This shift not only strengthens your sense of self, but also improves the quality of your connections with others. Now that you understand the need to let go of control, the next step is to build agency and self-respect through concrete, repeatable actions. Agency means recognizing that you are responsible for your own choices and that your well-being does not depend on others' approval. Self-respect follows from living in accordance with your values, even when doing so is uncomfortable or risky. One practical approach is to start naming your own preferences even in low-stakes situations. For example, when someone asks what you want to eat, state your honest choice, rather than deferring to the group. If a friend makes a request that does not work for you, explain your reasons and offer an alternative if you wish. In professional settings, clarify your limits and communicate them without apology. Each of these acts reinforces the message that your needs are valid and that you trust yourself to handle whatever reactions come your way. Another useful practice is to pause before responding to requests or demands. Give yourself time to check in with your own feelings and needs, rather than reacting out of habit. This allows you to respond from a place of intention rather than compliance. Over time, this habit strengthens your ability to act with integrity rather than out of fear. As you build these new habits, you may notice changes in your relationships. Some people may be surprised, confused, or even upset when you stop accommodating them automatically. However, this discomfort is temporary. Those who value you will adapt, and new relationships will develop based on mutual respect rather than one-sided self-sacrifice. The process is not always easy, but it is deeply rewarding. Eventually, you will find that your sense of agency and self-respect grows stronger. You no longer depend on others to define your worth, and you can navigate the complexities of life with greater confidence. Instead of feeling trapped by other people's expectations, you experience the freedom to make choices that are true to yourself. In summary, stopping the pattern of being a doormat is less about acquiring new skills and more about unlearning the need to control others' responses. When you let go of that drive and act with honesty, you create the space for healthier, more authentic relationships. Agency and self respect are built through repeated acts of self trust, and the result is a life that feels both more genuine and more free.